Taking It to the Streets is all about advancing firefighter safety and operational integrity for the fire service through provocative insights and dynamic discussions dedicated to both the art and science of firefighting and the traditions of the fire service. The focus at Taking It to the Street continues to be straightforward, street-level talk with intelligent, stimulating, and provocative insights and dynamic discussion with interactive dialogue and, most importantly, listener participation. Just like around the kitchen table or in the day room over a cup of coffee at 02:30 after a good run. And now, the latest edition of Taking It to the Streets with your host, Christopher Naum.
Welcome to this edition of Buildings on Fires, Taking It to the Streets, on your street, in your city, across the country, and around the world. Taking It to the Streets is a monthly radio talk show program on fireengineering.com blog talk radio, and I'm your host, Christopher Naum. As always, a heartfelt welcome to our dedicated and loyal program listeners and to our ever-expanding following of our newest live listeners and those of you that are listening to our program on your related media devices. We've got an exceptional program in store for you on this edition of Taking It to the Streets. Our program on this edition of Taking It to the Streets is really talking about some related incidences and events that really revolve around buildings on fire, and again, very profoundly and very specifically about buildings on fire and construction sites. We're going to be talking about construction site incidences, operational risks and challenges related to those events. Joining me on this edition, Captain Mike Wallingford from Louisville, Kentucky. I want to thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us on this edition and to, again, talk about and connect some dots here with some emerging challenges that seem to continue to go on when we talk about the fire service and operational issues dealing with construction site incidents and so forth. So, Mike, I want to thank you for taking time out of your very, very busy schedule. And I'll talk a little bit about how this sort of came about. A little bit about Mike's background. Again, let me just afford our listeners this opportunity. Mike Wallingford is a 28-year fire service veteran, a married father of two beautiful daughters, and currently signed as the hazmat captain with Jeffersontown Fire in Louisville, Kentucky. He's also a safety director for Flynn Brothers Contracting, which is a large construction and paving contractor in the metropolitan Louisville area. Again, his passion is in both careers has led him to educate fire responders on the risks and dangers of construction site responses. So, Mike, I want to thank you very, very much for joining us on Buildings on Fire, Taking to the Streets. We continue to talk about provocative insight, dynamic discussions, talking about the art and science of firefighting, and really talking about the tradition of the fire service. And in this episode, we're going to talk about the issues surrounding construction site-related incidences, both response and, again, the operational challenges and those risks that are associated with them. The one thing that brought us all together, and again, this sort of comes on the heel of FDIC here in 2023, coming on the post side of it, we'd had an opportunity, all three of us, to present there at FDIC this year, and both Doug and I had the opportunity to talk to our listeners as part of our live podcast right from the floor at FDIC. And Mike, you had the opportunity to present a classroom session at FDIC, which was entitled, wait for it.
Yeah, construction site responses and tactics for success.
So, and again, that brief opportunity really was, as we talked a little bit about in our pre-production meetings, really the 20,000-foot view all the way back down to sometimes a street view, but sort of going back and forth and really staying at that high level. One of the things that I think that when we discussed the programming idea of presenting this as one of our lead-ins as we get into the summer months here, were two recent incidences that our listeners may be familiar with. The most recent one occurred on June 4th of this year in New Haven, Connecticut, dealing with during the concrete pour of a second floor formwork what resulted in a collapse of that reinforcement of the shoring failure and the subsequent collapse during the concrete pour was very interesting. That, again, for many of our listeners, you may have seen some of the very dynamic both video as well as the still photographs that came out of that particular incident. And again, a 7-story structure, residential structure. They were pouring the second floor of that, and that resulted in some very, very time-sensitive operations while the concrete was starting to set in place. And then secondly, the other more significant event here in the Southeast that Chief Klein can talk a little bit further about, some insights on, was the May 18th event that occurred in Charlotte, North Carolina, resulting in a 5-alarm fire, mixed-use, podium constructed, very complex, very large footprint construction site, which was the third installment of 2 other sites that had already been completed to varying degrees. But again, a very complex under construction site, which unfortunately led to very significant property loss, and also unfortunately led to 2 civilian worker deaths as a result of that fire. In addition, there was a very significant rescue operation that was underway during the suppression activities, trying to confine that fire to the immediate area. There were quite a bit of exposure issues, along with a lot of other challenges relative to workers that were put into a safe refuge location, and again had to be assisted in that rescue effort. But a crane operator had to be rescued operating up in the crane location during the conduct of that suppression operation. So 2 very significant events that really tie into a number of other issues and other events that have occurred over the last couple of years. So we'll talk a little bit about those. We'll talk a little bit about some of the risks and standpoints. Mike, we're going to sort of ask you a couple of questions here. But again, for our listeners, there's a couple of standards that are out there from the NFPA 220 standard, which deals with building classifications and a variety of different aspects coming out of that. Also, the NFPA 241 standard on safeguarding construction, alterations, and demolition operations, which again has really been in the crosshairs over the last now 36 months, I would say, or even longer. It's something that has been neglected, I guess, for better words, in terms of its level of rigor and application on construction sites. And then lastly, the other one, which directly ties into this, that we will talk about more extensively over the next 60 minutes, and that's the NFPA 1620 standard on pre-incident planning. So, Mike, when we talk about construction sites, we talk about hazards. What's your biggest take on the issues at hand, as well as the issues that affect all departments, whether they be large or small, rural to suburban to urban to metro, whether it be a very large multi-block area footprint for a metropolitan location, or a standalone construction site that a rural or suburban organization might be contending with, or even an alteration or an addition or an expansion on an existing building. Again, they all relate back to construction, alterations, renovations. They all have varying degrees of hazards and risks, from something that's manageable to others that sometimes are perceived as being unmanageable, but they all can be managed, right, from that standpoint. So your take on it, and again, this is your lane. You're really very actively involved over a number of years. So give our listeners a little bit of insight on what you've been doing that has led you up to this, as well as your presentation at FDIC.
To be honest, Chris, first off, thanks for having me on. But secondly, this all began about 5 years ago with a local emergency response to a trench incident. My department, our ladder truck is assigned to the local trench rescue team. And of course, there was a dispatch for a trench rescue, and my heart dropped for a moment, because it was when I looked at the paging software, it was to one of my job sites for the construction company that I worked for. So of course, I'm thinking the worst, that I have, an individual that's trapped. And then once I arrived on scene, realized that it wasn't, that there was actually a young man that was going in to plug the end of a pipe for the end of the day so that they could backfill everything. picture perfect trench, beautiful. Could have put it on the cover of a magazine. Spoil pile was about 8 feet away from the edge of the trench, so well beyond any of the OSHA regulations. But unfortunately, a large rock and dirt clod had rolled into this trench and landed on this young man's leg and actually broke his femur in 4 spots. Well, the first EMS unit arrived, and they saw that the young man was in a trench and said, "We can't go in there." And the first engine company for that responding department arrived and said, "We can't go in there." So who do they call? Well, they call the trench rescue team. And so I saw a bit of a need there based off of they didn't know what a good trench looked like. So that started the juices flowing. And I created this course for construction site response because I saw it didn't matter the size of your the size of your department. It doesn't matter if you're the small volunteer department that may have 10 great volunteers up to all the way to FDNY where you're 13, 14,000 people. These challenges exist across the U.S. because construction is everywhere, whether it's a residential home, apartment complexes, commercial structures, or these tilt-up, wall areas as well. So there's a lot of need, and one of the biggest things that we in the fire service just don't do well is pre-plan this. We do great pre-plans and target hazard surveys when it's when the building's done and it's ready to be occupied. But we just don't look at this stuff close enough when, honestly, a lot of the risk and hazards exist.
It's interesting, again, when we talk about that reluctance at times, regardless of the organization's size or composition, again, whether it be a fully volunteer, a combination organization, or a career department that has defense in depth in terms of robust resources, special operations, and all of the other related elements there that would support a response. Fundamentally, when we talk about construction sites, both large and small, they all have very similar related risks. Obviously, we have the occupancy load of our contractors, our workers, our subcontractors. We have those that are coming and supporting the activities regarding the delivery of products and materials that are supporting construction. So there's a lot of dynamics when we look at those that are present within the shift activities of that construction site. Then you have all of the transient individuals coming and going, both professionals as well as the building side of it. And then the third part of that is the variation on the phasing of construction and activities. There's a lot of things going on at different periods of time, depending upon the cycle of activities. Sometimes those cycles are very limited to daytime operations, or they're 24/7 based upon the needs of that particular project and the financial implications and so forth. So ultimately, I think that for our listeners, depending upon the organizational size of where they are at and what they represent, it just takes that single company, that company officer, and those firefighters that are on that unit to show up and start the process, whether it be formally or informally. And I think, you and I talked about this, and Doug Klein, Chief Klein and I talk about this extensively when we talk about construction and incidences. If you see a sign that says coming soon, or you see that dumpster, or you see the construction fencing that has gone up, that's normally going to be a good cue that, hey, something's going on. And if it's in your first due, if it's in your response area, and you're either in your personal vehicle or the fire department vehicle, that's an opportunity to stop and find out where the construction trailer is or the field office and make a point of contact with that individual, right? And you wearing two hats, we talked about this, and it's so great when we have that kind of relationship. You see it on both ends of it. You see it from the fire service side, and then you also see that as the welcoming agent of your organization, and hopefully whether it be EMS or fire or law enforcement, again, it's all of the associated professions of first responders. having somebody come in and being met and greeted, hopefully with open arms, right? I mean, there are those that may not, but certainly I think from your standpoint, you've experienced that on both sides of it. So, how would you encourage those first responders, whether it be commanding officers or that company officer showing up and maybe not really being quite sure what they're looking for, but how would you make them feel comfortable, and what kind of information would you try to provide them in terms of that first type of meeting?
That was one of the biggest parts of my course, and it was some of the biggest questions and answer session in my session at FDIC this past April. It was, what am I looking for? Well, let's face it. When people call 911, what do they expect? They expect someone to show up and fix things. Well, if you're not versed in construction sites and what's going on at those sites, could it be very overwhelming to that initial company that arrives there? 100%. And that doesn't matter your experience level or professional or volunteer or anything. It literally can overwhelm anyone. And I ask people, why don't you stop at construction? Well, I don't know what's going on. And we're so afraid as firefighters, as males and females, we're so afraid that we're going to show up somewhere and you're going to ask a question and it's going to make you look dumb. Well, that's a problem. Believe me, there are plenty of construction companies like myself and other professional trades that if you have questions, I want to answer them. Why? Because if knock on wood, it never has to happen. But if I have to have a response from police, fire, EMS at any one of my job sites, wouldn't I feel more comfortable if you were a little more versed about what's going on? I talked about doing pre-plans earlier. One of the things that I share with all of my students, I told them, hey, I'll send it to you electronically or anything, but it's a construction pre-incident survey. And it really highlights some of the topics that I go over in the course. Is I really break it down into 4 sessions and 4 different sections, one being the fire. But that's the easy one for us, or at least that's what we thought before we just saw what we had, just last month. But then from there, dealing with somebody that's fallen and they're still suspended at heights. Then what about that trench incident? What about that confined space emergency? All 4 of these are items that pretty much go into every single construction project that you have going on, whether that's new construction or, as you bring up a great point, rehab or demolition. These are all parts of things that go on. How are we preparing ourselves? And this form that I have that really just kind of goes over some of those highlight items of things that if I know this before something happens there, it's really going to lead to my success. You don't have to be a trench rescue technician to understand what does a good trench look like,
Exactly. And I think, based upon the assumption that with any type of activity at a construction site or a renovation of a building or structure, it's fundamental. If we're in the emergency service side of all hazard response, we're either going to be concerned about what may catch on fire, how to control, mitigate, and manage that particular event. If there's an injury or a rescue, what might be the extent of what we have the capabilities of providing from the rescue or EMS side. But what happens when there are either additional hazardous materials that expand the severity and the magnitude of the incident, or something that requires special operational support? Does that jurisdiction have the availability? What's the timeliness of that response? And how can I pre-establish and pre-plan those events? Because we're certainly hoping that they don't occur, but whether it be the contractor or builder or us on the emergency delivery side, we have to anticipate what might potentially occur and be prepared for it. I think one of the things that we talked about, especially in light of the event that occurred in Charlotte, in terms of the severity of that fire and its the origination of that fire and how quickly it gained magnitude and severity, that certainly challenged and maybe at times overwhelmed the department one of the most fundamental aspects when we talk about any type of construction, regardless of the methods and materials of construction, is the potential for a fire and the most significant need aside from departmental resources, and that is the support of sustainable water, right? Would you, what are some of the issues that affect construction sites when we talk about the availability of both on-site water as well as the support within the either in the municipal systems grid or depending on where it may be located, where the water availability in those mains is going to be put in, it may not have caught up to the construction phases of it. So when the building is built, they very well may have a trunk line or additional water support for gallon per minute flow rates and so forth, but that may not be present at that particular time. So we talk about standpipe systems, we talk about temporary sprinkler protection, we talk about the operability of both on-site and then ancillary and proximal water sources. So what are some of the things that you have provided some insights on when we talk about construction site hazards from the fire department's perspective?
Well, once again, one of those items that I have put down on that pre-incident survey is where's your closest working water sources? That's the big one. There might be some hydrants that have been installed, but until depending on the jurisdiction that you're in, I know here in the Louisville metro area, the Louisville Water Company comes and they do the actual tap into the water main. So you can run everything for all your hydrants, and they're sitting there, but are they working? So that's one of those highlight items that I say we kind of need to know before there's a fire, right? Because how long is that lay going to be? Every jurisdiction is going to be a little bit differently on what their fire marshals may allow, or what local, what local, rules, regulations, and laws they have to follow. Could they be building that building and you not have adequate water, or what we would feel as being adequate water? And how is that going to tax your resources? What are you going to have to do to get to that vital or viable water source? One of the other things that I know that most every large cities dealing with, some of these smaller communities, we're building like crazy, right? So we're going vertical. But one of the things that's kind of being left behind in a lot of the thought processes is what about all of our utilities? Are they being built to take on what we're putting them through now? Sewer systems, the gas systems, the water systems, all of those things. So our infrastructure may not support. We could be at the end of a dead main somewhere, and they're building this building. What does it look like? How much water are we going to get out of that? And what can we support with that? So finding out where your closest water sources are is one of those key facts. And unfortunately, just, not being able to talk to anyone firsthand in Charlotte, but watching it, reading some of the articles that came out afterwards, they were up against a lot really fast. I mean, you saw some of the videos from that day, fairly windy day, going to push. I mean, you're missing all of the fire stops. I know the initial reports are saying that it started in a insulation foam trailer out down on the first floor. So of course it's going to rise pretty quickly with it being as unprotected as it is, without having sprinklers in place and anything like that. But one of the other key items you're missing is there's no fire alarm system to tell all of those people in the upper floors what's going on. It's not until they were faced with smoke and high heat, that they really kind of know what's going on. And bravo to Charlotte for making as many rescues as they did, in addition to the rescue in the tower crane. And yes, unfortunately, they did lose 2 people, but one of the things that I try to stress in that portion of fire in my course is when we pull up to a construction site and it is on fire, you can't automatically assume we're in defensive operations. And
there's no question. Well, that goes back into the whole accountability standpoint. Now, again, recognizing that OSHA typically, again, for those organizations or states that are OSHA compliant or OSHA regulated, and as well as the standards that are out there from NFPA and other ancillary groups. But NFPA or the OSHA 1910 as well as the OSHA 1926 standards for general industry and construction have very explicit requirements for accountability. Those have to be written. They're documented within the safety plans for the projects that, again, are going to alter based upon the stages of operation. So it's very incumbent upon the emergency services, the fire department, to identify, again, where that particular point of contact is going to be based upon entering the construction site in the event of an incident, who's going to have the appropriate information, and hopefully, again, that information is up to date. It's current for the appropriate time in which that shift in activity is occurring. But there's also the likelihood, based upon the transient nature of the workers, that they may very well be in a variety of different locations that aren't exactly concentrated. It depends on where the foremen and the supervisors and work activities are, whether there's perturbations on the schedule. So the schedule says they should be here, but based upon the morning's activity or the afternoon activity, they're suddenly somewhere else based upon delivery problems or weather-related conditions that changes them. So it's really important that our responding agencies clearly recognize the importance of accountability, how they are going to be monitoring and capturing that information, and then how to communicate to them. Because, again, they may be trying to find safe refuge areas that may have been planned out for an assembly point, but now that fire propagation has affected it based upon where the fire originates. And guess what? Plan A, Plan B, Plan C have gone out the door because of these other unknowns. So, there's quite a lot of dynamics, and that's, I think, the important for our listeners who may never have experienced a job site related emergency, whether it be a fire or other events. The other events can be managed with a higher degree of control based upon the specifics. So whether I have a trench collapse, whether I have some type of spill or containment issue or what have you, when we talk about fire dynamics and the fire loading, both in terms of building materials that are normally going to be in concentrated storage areas, the degree of construction and what type of materials are exposed to potential ignition sources, as well as the fire propagation. In other words, that fire front and that fire extension can occur in such a rapid dynamic standpoint that we may think we have minutes when in fact we have only seconds. And at the same time, that fire will burn itself out relatively quickly and de-escalate itself downward before we are fully engaged in a suppression effort. So there's a lot of things going on that, especially from a fire standpoint, that can lead to very significant challenges for worker safety, and at the same time put our fire personnel and our companies at a high degree of risk if we're not managing and have some forethought, whether it be from the company standpoint or the commander standpoint, or having the site professionals that are saying, hey, look, we've got fresh concrete pour with short form works in this location. It's a high vulnerability. This is going to be defensive in this location, and you've got to position yourself in a certain locale. Or there may be exposure to light gauge metals or structural steel that may not be able to take that particular type of heat or flame impingement, which might influence decision making, influence tactics and strategies. So there's a lot of really support work that the site professionals, the site representatives, the superintendents, the supervisors, the foremans, the engineers, the architects, the resident individuals that may be on site, depending upon how complex it may be. So it's very, very imperative that the emergency service organizations, upon arrival, the commanding officers, incident commanders, company officers, that command staff meets up with your counterparts, right? That individual or individual teams that are going to help support the efforts, because you cannot operate independently. It really is a very significant cooperative effort, right?
Yeah. One of the biggest things is I want, when I arrive on scene as a company commander, who am I looking for? Well, I'm looking for the people that have all of the drawings, that have all of those things that can kind of give me a better idea of the day to day. I encourage people to go out to these job sites. Why? Well, because what are they building in in your district? How is it being built? You can kind of watch how people come and go. Yep, you're right. The OSHA standard says that you should have an emergency action plan. Everybody understands it. Well, I can tell you from doing numerous that is a contractual thing. That goes in the office from one office to another office, and that gets signed by somebody that wants to sign that contract. But what validity does it have when it gets to the job site itself? It's like herding cats at some of these, job sites. And so having a true accountability, depending on the size of some of these projects, it could be a practical impossibility because of all of the different trades. And they don't all communicate with each other, all of the time. But like with the fire there in Charlotte, that's no different than the two-story apartment complex that they're building, 2 or 3 buildings in your own little fire district. It's just a smaller scale, right? All the same work's going into that. So the accountability, seeing how a construction site operates by your company getting out there and just kind of watching what's going on. But secondly, that also really gives you an opportunity to see the bones, to see the bones of a building. And of course, I'm a little bit different. So yeah, my crew and I, we get out quite often if I see a new construction project. That's just kind of me, but it's amazing what you would learn. We had some single-story patio homes that we did some walkthroughs while they were building them, and we realized that the walkway or that mud room in between the garage area and the living area, they had actually constructed out of cinder block and put a concrete ceiling on it. It was an area of refuge for any type of, severe weather. And I told the guys, I said, that's something very important to see because, boy, trying to pull those ceilings, if you had a dryer fire in that area, you're going to learn real quick, right?
Surprise. Yeah.
That's right. Absolutely. So getting out, not only are you seeing how things are being constructed, what it's being constructed of, and for God's sakes, we know that some of this stuff is extremely scary when we think of what it's going to do if it was to catch fire. But getting out to these job sites, meeting these people, it's going to give you a leg up on an incident that you hope never happens. I want you to know everything about it, and I want you to be as prepared as possible because, just as I said earlier, when people call 911, they expect you to act. If you show up, you can't just put your hands up and say, well, we don't do trench rescue, or well, we don't, because that's not going to be an acceptable answer to somebody that has a buried employee.
Well, it's important, too, based upon whether we're talking about a residential construction site with a single standalone unit or multiple residentials within a developing subdivision, or that larger complex commercial building, or that mixed-use occupancy, half a city or city block type of construction, low-rise to high-rise. It just increases the potential magnitude and the severity, which again, the complexity of that incident, they all have the same parameters, whether it be that single-family residential or that multi-story high-rise. It's just the steps of magnitude of how bad that incident may evolve. But whether we're moving dirt and putting holes in the ground, the potential for excavation-related trench collapses or failures, there has to be preparation for some knowledge, at least at the awareness level, following the appropriate standards for those applications, a confined space, and then everything that leads up through it. So when we talk about construction sites and there's different phasings, again, just for the benefit of our listeners, there's a lot of different things that occur with site preparation. We talk about excavation work, laying out foundations. We get into various framing systems, large or small, whether it be wood for residential, or a variety of different materials going all the way up to the light gauge metals, the structural steel, the lightweight engineered construction, or the variety of hybrid construction, including podium and a variety of other introduced materials, whether it be type 1, type 2, and all the way to type 5. So we talk about the potential risk of that material, but fundamentally, as you just talked about, if you're able to get out there, you may not understand it all, but hopefully you've got a good, passionate site representative who's going to explain the methods of construction. Hopefully our responders, and I'm expecting that at least at the company officer level and certainly at the commanding officer's level, that level of knowledge of the KSAs is at least above and beyond the intermediate level. The guys, hopefully, guys and gals, have an understanding of construction principles and can ask some leading questions and can observe and identify some things. But everyone can benefit from that, those field activities and seeing what goes on at those various stages. So we encourage, I think, our listeners to understand that just because there's nothing being built, there's a tremendous opportunity to see what type of excavation and groundwork is occurring, how earth is being moved, how the preparation is put into place, and understanding how everything begins with those footers all the way up through. I mean, that really is the base, right?
Yeah, it is. And one of the things getting out there, especially in those initial stages of the construction phase, one of the other items that I list on that pre-incident survey is access issues. Guess what? There's times where, something's being built, there's not a road to yet. They're using tracked, excavators and tracked dozers and off-road haul trucks and all of these things, because that's how they have to access that area. Well, guess what? I've seen plenty of construction pieces of equipment that catch fire, and now you're back to that. Where's my closest water source, or how am I going to access this? What's it going to take to access that? And it really gives the company level, no matter who you are, the opportunity to go out and what if, and really challenge the minds of all the people on your crew, on your department, within your organization. What if we had something happen here, guys? How are we going to handle this? Boy, if you have those forethoughts and then something did happen, whether it's right now in their careers or their time as a volunteer, or it's 10 years from now, do you think they're going to have an initial thought process? That's the main goal of my course and doing all of this educating. Is I understand that not every department can be fully prepared to handle any one of the types of incidents that they'll see on a construction site. But that doesn't mean we can't be prepared. We have to build relationships. I say that about 1,000 times in that class, is if you can't do it, you at least have to know who can and have a plan in place so that, or train together so that maybe there's things that you can do. Just because you're not a confined space tech or a trench rescue technician or a rope tech does not mean that you are not a viable, valuable part of that operation. We can't just sit around on our hands.
Well, it's also important to know what you shouldn't do or what those limitations may be. So, and again, I think years past, we saw a lot of the outcomes with it, which were typically very serious and did not lead to positive outcomes, where first responders are jumping into unprotected trench excavations, and we have wall cracks and failures. We have a variety of other factors or conditions that, again, we just don't have the knowledge base with excavation or related emergency responses, preparation, safeguards, and so forth. And that goes without saying because of the uniqueness of that job site with incomplete construction that exposes those risks and increases them at such a high level. So whether it be fire or explosions or hot work activities or the movement of products. Again, we talk about loads that are being transferred utilizing rigging systems and crane systems, and we've seen plenty of crane failures within the aspect of not understanding the rigging application, not having appropriate loads put in place, and not having outriggers put in place. I mean, there's such a variety of different things all the way up through and inclusive of just that minor injury or significant injury that still requires the department to respond, get on site, and then have the mobility to get to a particular location with apparatus. And then what you sort of led into, it's also having tactical mobility to get yourself from some point into that particular structure, vertically or horizontally, to render a support and assistance, which may require you to utilize various types of freight or equipment elevators, a variety of different temporary systems, or having to go up the temporary stairwells and up through scaffolding locations to get to a particular location. And then what else? Now we talk about patient packaging and getting the patient out of that particular environment back out ready for transport. So there are so many different facets of all of this, and they all start with, again, just making that visit to the site and having an appreciation. Number one, what's being built? What is it going to occupy? What's the function going to be? And at what stage am I showing up there? Again, you might be showing up and the place is getting ready to get its certificate of occupancy, and they're just waiting for systems to be tested and so forth. Or you go in while they're waiting for some activities. And again, actually, here's the other thing that I just thought about too. Depending upon the size and the complexity of that building, you very well may have occupied areas of that construction site, or excuse me, you may have various areas of that particular construction site occupied while additional construction is taking place. So it's not always, hey, the building has been completed. Based upon, again, the size, horizontal or vertical, you may have occupied spaces that are adjacent to active construction that, again, poses a lot of other unforeseen or unexpected or unplanned for risks.
Yeah, one of the, when we talk about visiting, and I love the emphasis on that, because you mentioned earlier, for a lot of years, we did things where we put ourselves in positions to where we became a part of the problem. And we can't help if we're a part of the problem. So that knowledge of trying to share the basics of certain of these things are, in the class when I talk about, how to prepare for that fire because of the challenges that you're going to see and preparing for it. I have a absolutely amazing relationship with United Rentals Trench Safety.
Great organization.
Oh my gosh! And their local office here in Louisville, these guys and gals support me 110% in this movement of trying to educate. So they give me with handout materials and everything that I provide whenever I do the classes, and they have a wonderful trifold, and it goes on your visor, and I give whoever wants them, they get them, and I'm like, here, please put them on your apparatus, because guess what? It answers all of those questions that you have on what is a good trench. We don't stop and ask people about trenches because we don't know. So we don't, who's our first call? Well, we call OSHA. Well, listen, for every one or two construction companies that are doing things right, there's just as many, if not more, out there that are cutting corners and everything else. I encourage people to stop at these sites because guess what? Stopping for 5 or 10 minutes to ask some questions or at least have a presence there could save you 10 to 15 hours of having to dig somebody out later. I mean, it truly could. So not only are you helping out your crews, but you're truly protecting those people that are working within your districts. And by having a basic amount of knowledge and having some, having some reference material in front of you is something that's completely, is so helpful. And I'll share that stuff with anybody. Man, you email me or anything, I'll get you everything I have to help you be successful in doing pre-incident surveys or, stuff from United Rentals Trench Safety just to help give you that information, because we're only better when we're making the people around us better than us too.
For the departments that have very little support in depth, in other words, there aren't a lot of support from the buildings or codes department, fire marshal's office, the emergency service, whether it be the fire, rescue, EMS, there may be limitations. So those types of resources, and again, even some of the codes and standards that are there sometimes are not user friendly. And if there is some guidance that similar to what you're discussing and what you have available, it's a great starting point. I would also venture to say, and again, correct me if I'm misspeaking here, but again, as a resource point, any of our listeners can reach out to you and direct message you to get some additional insights and guidance and direction, whether it be you on some things, myself, Chief Klein, and so forth. Again, anyone that's involved in construction-related insights and so forth can provide some some knowledge, insights. But again, the pre-fire planning documents, how to reach out, what to do is the starting point. It all starts with visiting that job site, knocking on the door, getting past this from the street through the construction fence, that construction gate that says, again, no trespassing, PPE required, point of contact, and so forth. It's just really reaching out and crossing that threshold and identifying a point of contact and developing that relationship for the entire course of that construction and activities.
Yeah, because I think in light of the recent events, I think you will find that construction companies are going to be a little bit more open as well. And safety has been a big push. I mean, let's face it, 10 or 20 years ago, there's a lot of things that we did in the construction business that weren't really acceptable then, but definitely are not acceptable now. But when we look at a couple of things, like those guys in New Haven, wow, what a job. When you're talking about, they're pouring that total floor pour was about 4.2 million pounds of concrete, and they were about 3.2 million into their pour. And not knowing 100%, but some initial accounts are that maybe they weren't able to start getting it floated out, and it probably had heavy pours in certain areas, and the forms just couldn't take that. But to be able to rescue 6 people in about 45 minutes, when we start talking about rescues, and it used to be the old golden hour and all of those things, think about 45 minutes of making a rescue in wet concrete that not only are you trying to rescue these individuals to get them out of harm's way, but this kind of harm is going to continue to be harm's way as it continues to harden. And a lot of these projects, there's additives that are added into these so that they have a shorter cure time, especially for things of that, so you are really racing against the clock. And I don't remember the name, but there's a local fire buff up there for New Haven and had some absolutely amazing pictures that really documented the rescue operations and the challenges that went with those.
Yeah, the command staff, everyone in New Haven did an exceptional job from the respondent standpoint, and certainly lessened the likelihood for additional injuries. But again, when we talk about the timeliness of actions, there are things that go on in the construction process that are time sensitive, both in terms of how things set or are connected or stressed. Again, different construction features, activities, methodologies, and practices all have a time component to them that we have to have an understanding and appreciation of. Again, it just goes back to some fundamentals of understanding how and what's going together, how that relates back to the uniqueness of that project. I think it's safe to say that there is much more hybrid related construction going on than meets the eye. With performance-based codes versus the prescriptive codes of the past, any construction site may have some very unique attributes to it based upon the architect and the engineer, the contractor, and the developer that decided this is how we're going to put the pieces together to build this building that creates a very unique structure when it's eventually occupied or in use. Ultimately, the fire department benefits by doing those job site reviews, getting that insight, capturing that information to help support potential future incident responses. If you are just thinking that this is a building of type 1 or type 2 construction or type 5 construction, it's a particular occupancy, and you're going based upon our traditional textbooks, whether it be tactical books or even construction books, then you're only fooling yourself, because there is so much more to that than meets the eye.
No, absolutely. It's, as I said, I always say that in my class in the very beginning I always say, why do we not ask questions? Well, because as firefighters, we're dumb. We're trained to a certain thing in certain books, and that's the way we're supposed to learn it. And guess what? There's not a section in any manual that covers construction sites. It just doesn't. Building construction? Sure. But how did it get there? Well, that's a portion that we've kind of missed out on. And I've been blessed to have the opportunity to teach a couple times at FDIC and some other places. And I always welcome those opportunities because I feel like it's something that truly needs to be talked about. Because I think to a certain degree, it's an easy fix. It really is. But the problem of it is trying to get people to look at it in the perspective in which they need to look at it. Yes, you're right. You can't be prepared. Every department across the U.S. can't have all of this trench rescue equipment or all of this rope equipment. They just can't have that. Sure, there's plenty of grants out there to help you get equipment. Perfect. But the grants run out, and they don't give you money to continue to maintain and all of those things that go with it, and then the training that goes into it as well. So yes, there are wonderful organizations that are blessed to be able to have those types of assets and resources, and they're proficient at those. So just because you can't doesn't mean that you just we don't do that. And I've had the blessing of traveling across the U.S. doing OSHA regulatory training and consulting, and I've found there's plenty of multi-million-dollar power generation plants and chemical manufacturing companies that are protected by 10 and 20 and 30 individual volunteer fire departments that if there's a fire, man, they're going to be great, and they're just, the resources just aren't there. And I understand it, so, but that's not a reason for us not to get out.
No.
To get out and check it out.
The availability of computer-based training modules for the construction industry. So again, here's another untapped resource for our listeners. Again, they're non-fire service related, but you can go to a variety of different construction-based organizations that provide training, as well as the professional associations that are out there, and take the CBTs just as well as anyone else, and gain some insights, and whether it be at cost or those that are free of charge. There are a lot of things that if you're just willing to seek it out or are given some guidance by many of us, including yourself, that can help direct, push, and get you to the right location. I would be remiss if I didn't offer the other resource for our listeners here, an exceptional book that helps give you some additional insights on building construction, and that is the book by Francis Ching. It's Building Construction Illustrated. There are a number of previous editions that are out there. You can buy the book in its current edition and format, but all the way going back to the first edition from 1975, all the way to the most current. Those are typically available on a variety of different sites. Amazon.com has those available at very limited costing, sometimes as little as $5 a copy, but they will give you some of the insights that are necessary to truly understand building construction that many of our fire service textbooks on the subject unfortunately fall very, very short on because of the limited chapter sizes and unfortunately the extensiveness of what information is available but not being produced for the emergency service side. So you really got to go outside of the outside of pocket regarding non-fire service related manuals and textbooks and technical guides and information that the professional associations on the building, construction, engineering, architectural side of it, the support agencies, the material sides, and so forth. There's a lot of different groups that can provide that guidance. And again, Mike, you can help support that activity. I'll ask you this. What are some of, if you were to say, some of the typical questions that come out of your classes that the students ask about? What would some of those questions be that are pretty common in all of your deliveries?
I think one of the biggest ones is how do I take this back to my organization? Because let's face it, sometimes the individuals that are taking it upon themselves to get out and get educated aren't necessarily the decision makers within a department. So one of the things that I always try to tell them is you go to your department with a plan, right? You take this pre-incident survey and you say, hey, we've got whether it's Monday night or Tuesday night training at our volunteer organization, or hey, I'm on shift Wednesday and I'd like to take my company and we're going to go do this. And I want to see how, you're not putting it on someone else to do it. You're taking the reins. You're taking something that hopefully either yourself or your organization invested in to send you to a place like an FDIC or any of the other great conferences that are out there. Um, and you brought something back that was valuable to your organization. You have to show that value when you come back. So if you take this and I thank you very much if you attended my class, and you take this and you go back and you do something with it, that's far better for the organization. Makes me feel good. Hopefully it makes you feel good because you're able to make some sort of a difference within your organization. And it didn't cost the organization anything other than what it cost you to send you to a conference or a class. But yeah, they start asking. I get a lot of questions about trenching. There's a lot of questions. Why? Well, because it's in the news a lot now. I mean, in 2022, we had 39 trench deaths across the U.S., which was up from the 22 we had the year before. So when I said earlier, for every one company that's doing the right thing, there's a few out there that may be cutting corners. It's evident in what we're seeing just in trench deaths. Now that's not counting everybody that was trapped, and luckily, which are far less, that make it out of that. But the questions that come out of there is how can I make this work in my department? And I think that's the biggest thing. You take the range, you take this information, the other information I gave you, and you show its value back within your organization.
And again, regardless of how small or large the construction activity may be, there may be a couple of framers, a couple of drywallers, maybe one plumber, an HVAC guy, somebody that's doing the landscaping and so forth. I mean, there are either singular or small size individuals that are contracting, subcontracting, all the way up to the significant multiple organizations and unions and support staff that make up a very complex project and so forth. So it's important to understand how do we provide safety to the workers on the job site? How do we provide safety for that site's potential hazards and risks to our community, the exposures that may be around it, whether it be nothing other than open fields, or it may be significant tax base and high risk occupancies that might be adjacent to it. Again, something came to mind here, a construction site fire that occurred a couple of years back in the city of Raleigh. And again, based upon the phasing of those activities, crane failure, unoccupied crane, but again, the severity of that and magnitude of that fire caused significant exposure issues in occupied low-rise, high-rise structures, a variety of different occupancies that really challenged that city and the emergency service responders on so many different levels and the lessons learned. So it just takes that impetus, number one, to recognize that there's unique issues affecting construction sites, identify those in your first due, if it's within that confine of a smaller scale, or within your battalion or district, or a larger division, or within your city. However small the unit may be or however large, it all starts with that first responding area. And we always talk about that first due. There's going to be one station that has some degree of ground coverage that comprises the square feet or square miles of your response area, and there's some activity going on, right? It's either that building under construction, renovation, large or small, and identify those things that, again, are at risk. Talk to your staff, talk to command, get some input, and just get out in the streets. Get out in the streets, ask the questions, and then start that journey, start that process to stay abreast at those various stages and document. I think that's the other thing that we didn't really stress enough about, but document what it is that you are seeing, bring that information back, share it with not only other individuals within the organization that may not have gone out to that site visit, be able to develop some things that are either online that can be either hard copy or communicated. Again, everybody can do some great PowerPoint programs and put those online in terms of your internal activities. And then also don't neglect the other companies. So whether it be mutual aid, whether it be other second or third due companies within the career side, other organizations that you are going to be requesting additional support on, get them informed about what it is that you are gaining the insights on, right? So share the information, because when you're calling them, they need to have that same level of knowledge as you're gaining on the front end. So, and then keep everything up to date. Things may change. There's going to be weather-related activities. There's going to be other environmental things, work activities. We talk about supply chain, right? Activities that sort of slow the progress of that job down, and then suddenly they get that shipment coming in of whether it be steel or other pieces, and suddenly they're going like gangbusters to increase that building's completion rate. So things evolve either slowly or quickly. You got to stay on top of it, whether you're on or off shift, and you just got to sort of drop those barriers down. Don't be afraid to reach out to those individuals that do have that level of insight on the other side of the fence. Ask the questions, gain the insights. So, Mike and I were talking about this during our pre-production conversations. One of the things that we may be looking to do, we're going to take a look at the logistics and the other aspects of that, but possibly provide an opportunity to do some touring and actually site visits in a controlled manner, maybe a little bit of a formal classroom presentation, and then actually go out into the streets, maybe somewhere right in your backyard there in the Louisville metropolitan area, to provide this as an opportunity for those of our listeners that can come from wherever, or make it more of a regional activity. This sort of comes into concert with what we're doing with our reading the building, walking tours, and looking at current constructed activities out there. And this is really a great opportunity to do a facilitated construction site related building read, right? Just getting some insights and some knowledge and trying to figure it all out, right?
Yeah, I think giving people the visual. We could sit in a classroom and talk about it all the time. I could post some pictures up on there all the time if I want to. But as valuable as you're taking it to the streets, walks have been and the great responses, I can see that we could definitely partner that up and do before the building and kind of really show them the meat and potatoes of what goes into even getting that building there and the risk and the hazards that are associated with that entire process, because it doesn't really matter if it's a single family home or if it's a multi-story high rise. The risks are honestly the same. It's just the severity of those based off of the size itself, because the same things are going into that home. They're going to be going into that, they're going into that multi-story high rise. It's just in smaller scales. So if we can prepare you for the big one, the rest of them should trickle down. And we've got plenty of construction projects around here, but if you travel anywhere throughout the U.S., we've got plenty of places that we could travel to do walking tours. It's just making it all happen. So,
one of the things I always tell when I do my building construction classes, I always tell the guys and gals again, is that to really get a feel for a true measure of being into the job, whether it be career or volunteer. And I always say this to the guys is that tell me how many times you've been threatened with being kicked off of a job site or being arrested because you're out there poking around, looking at some things, again, either on or off shift, or the amount of building construction pictures and so forth that you're documenting on your own, that you're sharing, again, with your companies, or just for your own professional development. It's something that each and every one of us that are on the job, volunteer to career, large or small, rural to metro, you've got to stay abreast of what's happening with the continuing evolving nature of our built environment and so forth. So, Mike, as we said, we are pretty much running out of time here. I wanted to keep this to a limited presentation. I think our listeners can certainly expect, as we always have done in our other programs, a second or third part of this in an upcoming series. We'll figure out what our next conversation may be. Maybe we'll talk about some more complex podium construction sites, or type 1, type 2 site that has a variety of different elements to it, and maybe drill down a little bit further on some of the hazards, operational risks. I mean, we talked about everything from special ops, hazardous materials, trench excavation, confined space, injury, fire and so forth, but and we're just scratching the surface. So I think definitely at the 10 to 20,000 foot view on this, but we will look forward to another edition of Taking It to the Streets in an upcoming episode later this year. Any closing comments, Mike?
No, I just I took one thing away from FDIC. When I looked at every one of my reviews, and there's always going to be one or two, and I'm okay with that. But the review was that I didn't talk enough about tactics, and so I wanted to clear that up just a little bit. When you come to my class, in the fire service, a lot of people think tactics are stretching a hose line or throwing a ladder. It can be preparation to make sure that you're doing the right thing on top of that. So just because the word tactics is in there doesn't mean that we're going to start stretching or throwing ladders in a class about construction. My tactics that I want to try to teach you are how to prepare your organization so that you're ready in the case if something ever happened there. But I think we're doing a great thing. I'm loving this movement. I'm loving being able to have a platform to be able to share this on. It's great to team up with you because you're doing a phenomenal thing on the buildings themselves, and I just want to help on how it got there. So,
well, we'll definitely have some more conversations on the construction side of this. We'll also take a look at some other opportunities that we may be doing off of this platform just to be able to continue the conversation. So take a look and keep track of our respective social media postings for those opportunities. We will definitely take a look at what we can do here on our fireengineering.com podcasting, some webinars and some other things coming up. And again, there's a variety of other resources. I would encourage you to take a look at some of the NIOSH reports. There are a number of actually not a significant number, but there are a few NIOSH line of duty death reports that revolved around some type of either deconstruction or construction site related activities. There are also a number of departmental issued after action reports that are out there that I would encourage you to look at, both current within the last number of years, as well as a number of historical events that have occurred in previous years past that are just as relevant today and have significant lessons and learnings and best practice that come out of it. We continue to see these adverse trends affecting construction site related fires occurring throughout the United States, both large and small. I think the unsung heroes that are out there are those smaller size events that don't make it and percolate up to the national news media cycles. And again, it's whether it be our trade journals and social media sites, it's those smaller scale events that are occurring each and every day that might relate back to an injury on a job site. It may relate back to a framing system that was blown over due to insufficient shoring and support that results in an injury, or a pancake collapse of a wood frame residential, all the way up through and inclusive of the events that we talked about. And again, I'm sure that there's going to be a lot of learnings that are going to come out of both of these two events. We just made mention of them only because of their timeliness of them, but certainly there's quite a bit of activities that are going to be taking place to identify the appropriateness and the level of detail that both of the events from Connecticut as well as North Carolina really demand on all different levels so that we can gain those insights from an operational standpoint. Mike, I want to thank you very much for taking time out of your busy schedule. I look forward to talking with you more and sharing some of these insights. For our listeners, again, reach out to Mike. You can direct message him. You can go back on the fire engineering site, go back to FDIC's website to get some point of contact information for you. If you want to share your email, I'll give you that opportunity. Just share that right now. I think we lost your audio, Mike.
There we go. It is M. Wallingford, WALLINGFORD, at Jeffersontown Fire. So JEFFERSONTOWN fire.com.
Very good. And again, I want to thank our listeners. You are downloading or viewing us. This is our first opportunity to do our video segment of our podcast. You're listening to our audio. We're going to take advantage of some other opportunities here in our upcoming series. Mike, again, thank you so very, very much. Look forward to working with you on some upcoming programs. So until next time, companies are in quarters and off the air. Stay safe, but keep in mind there's a job being worked somewhere in the streets in your city, across the country, and around the world doing what we do best and being who we are, and that's firefighters. Take care, everyone. Stay safe. And until the next time, this is Chris Naum on Buildings on Fire, Taking to the Streets on Fire Engineering Blog Talk Radio. Thanks, everybody, and signing off. Stay safe.